I'm Sophia, and welcome to What We Need to Know About Ukraine. Here, I learn about Ukrainian history, literature, and culture, and share my findings with you. Today's episode is about the emergence of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and Kyiv's story from its prehistoric beginnings until becoming the birthplace of the Kyivan Rus. Many debate on the origin of Kyiv and when the people living on its land can be considered to have found the city Kyiv. The oldest human traces on the territory of Kyiv date from the late Paleolithic period, meaning around 40,000 to 15,000 years ago. The Kirillivska archaeological site is located on the district of Podil in Kyiv, with remains from that period. Found there were traces of fires, flint, piles of mammoth bones, of in total more than 60 mammoths and some with ornamental carvings, as well as bones of rhinos and teeth of cave bears and lions, primitive dwellings built from wood and skins. There were also flint knives and scrapers. This dates back to approximately 25,000 years before Common Era, but some argue it is even older. As early as 500 years before Common Era, Neolithic tribes originating in Ukraine practiced animal husbandry and agriculture. The most notable of those was the Tripilya culture, and it was located where modern-day Kyiv is today. I will explain in detail in how the Tripilya culture lived, since the following archaeological cultures are very similar to it. Dwellings were built in the form of dugouts or semi-dungeons, as well as mostly ground dwellings. The floor, walls, and ovens were often strengthened with clay. At the early stages of development of the Tripilyan culture, the ground floor rectangular buildings had straw or reed roofs, and the layout of the settlements took the shape of a circle or an oval, with farm animals and agriculture being on the inside, enclosed in a way. The basis of the economy during this period was agriculture and animal husbandry. Hunting, fishing, and gathering were also important. They sowed wheat, barley, millet, rye, and peas. The land was worked with hoes made of deer horn, stone, or bone, and digging sticks with pointed ends. Harvesting was done using sickles and flint inserts. Grain was ground with stone grinders. Women sculpted clay dishes, made yarn, clothes, while men hunted, raised cattle, fished, and made tools from flint, bone, and stone. Pottery has achieved significant development during this time. Clay dishes of various shapes were sculpted by hand. Large pear-shaped vessels for grain, various shaped pots, bowls, and spoons. Female statuettes, house models, necklaces, and amulets were sculpted from clay. The surface of the dishes was covered with a sunken ornament, or grooves in the form of ribbons of several parallel lines forming spiral forms of the ornament. Most of the statuettes were also covered with this ornament. Statuettes, models of inhabitants, and amulets had a ritual purpose and were associated with farming cults. Among the investigated early Tripilyan settlements, various copper products, mostly jewelry, were found, although rarely. There were bracelets, rings, hooks, etc. According to the Finnish scientist Asko Perpola from the University of Helsinki, there are linguistic reasons to believe that the wheel was invented precisely in the Tripilyan culture, on the territory of modern Ukraine. Older sources refer to Mesopotamia as the birthplace of the wheel. Meanwhile, more recent ones suggest that Eastern Europe and Mesopotamia invented the wheel independently of each other. In any case, the wheel was invented in Ukraine. In modern Ukrainian culture, carpet making, pottery, wood carving, embroideries, and pysankas, which are Ukrainian Easter eggs, have many geometric and floral ornament motifs that clearly resemble the ornamentation of the Paleolithic and the Neolithic era in Ukraine. After Tripilya culture came Zarubintsy culture to the lands of modern-day Kyiv, from approximately the 3rd century before Common Era to the 1st century Common Era. These people are sometimes considered to be the pre-Slavic ancestors of the early Slavs. Interestingly, the people from this culture practiced cremation, but would bury the urn along with food and ornaments. Otherwise, as I said before, most archaeological cultures I mentioned today will have similar practices of agriculture, hunting, and living, but perhaps they made different pottery, ornaments, and decorations. There were also a lot of excavated Roman coins and burial grounds from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries Common Era found in Kyiv, which proves that at least starting the 1st century CE, Kyiv was a large trade center and settlement. Kyiv culture is the next one, and that was located on the territory of Kyiv, of course. It is an archaeological culture dating from about the 2nd to the 5th centuries and named after Kyiv, Ukraine's capital, by those who discovered it. Kyiv culture is widely considered to be the first identifiable Slavic archaeological culture, and it was formed on the basis of Zarubinci culture that I have previously mentioned. Around this time, in the 2nd century Common Era, a city was marked on Ptolemy's map of Sarmatia, called Azagarium. It was located on what is today Kyiv, and more specifically Podil. It proves that Kyiv existed for much longer than many historians have thought, and people have lived there permanently for a very long time. Kyiv culture was contemporaneous and closely connected to, and located mostly just north of, Chernyakiv culture, which I will talk about now. Their economy was like every other culture's prior, focusing on the cultivation of wheat, barley, and so forth. They also made pottery using the pottery wheel, and sometimes handmade. Their funeral rites, however, were interesting, since inhumation and cremation were both practiced, and if the bodies were not cremated, they were buried with their head towards north. They also put jewelry as gifts for the dead, and very rarely did they put weapons. Approximately the 3rd to the 4th century on the territory of Kyiv, another state existed. It was called Oyum, and it was said to be part of Scythia, or simply a name for Scythia, Scythia in Ukrainian. Oyum is believed to be a country populated by the Goths, a Germanic peoples coming from Scandinavia. A fun fact is that they were the ones who played a major role in the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the emergence of medieval Europe. The Goths, however, did not originate in Ukraine, but moved there because of its riches, according to the Byzantine Goth historian Jordanes, who lived in the 6th century. He wrote, quote, "But when the number of people increased greatly, and Philimir, son of Gadaric, reigned as king, about the 5th since Beric, he decided that the army of Goths with their families should move from that region. In search of suitable homes and pleasant places, they came to the land of Scythia, called Oyum in that tongue. Here they were delighted with the great richness of the country, and it is said that when half the army had been brought over, the bridge whereby they had crossed the river fell in utter ruin, nor could anyone thereafter pass to or fro. This part of the Goths, which is said to have crossed the river and entered with Philimir into the country of Oyum, came into possession of the desired land, and there they soon came upon the race of Spali, joined battle with them and won the victory." End of quote. In the last third of the 4th century, under the pressure of the hordes of Huns advancing from the east, the Goths were forced to leave Oyum and cross the borders of the Roman Empire, and would eventually stop being distinct people. In archaeology, though, Oyum is identified as Chernyakiv culture. The Goths, at any rate, had a lot of influence in it. Unfortunately, there is not much else known about the country of Oyum. Meanwhile, Scythia and Scythians deserve their own separate episode. According to Nestor the Chronicler, a famous chronicler from Kyiv, and his Tale of Bygone Years, also known as the Primary Chronicle of Rus, written in the 12th century, Kyiv was started by 4 siblings, the brothers Kyi, Shchek, and Khoriv, and their sister Libid. The city of Kyiv was then named after the oldest brother Kyi, according to the legend. Kyiv Day is celebrated based on this legend, and in 1982, its 1500th anniversary was officially celebrated. Nestor the Chronicler wrote, quote, "There were 3 brothers, Kyi, Shtek, and Khoriv, and their sister was named Libid. Kyi lived upon the hill where the Borshiv Trail is now, and Shtek dwelt upon the hill named Shchekovitsa, while on the third resided Khoriv, after whom this hill is named Khorivitsa. They built a town and named it after Kyiv, their eldest brother. Around the town lay a wood and a great pine forest in which they used to catch wild beasts. These men were wise and prudent. They were called Polanians, and there are Polanians descended from them living in Kyiv to this day." End of quote. There are actually Armenian records of the 4 siblings, written 3 centuries earlier than Nestor's, and Kyi was mentioned in various sources from the Byzantium. The brothers, Kyi, Shchek, and Khoriv, and their sister Libid, were the leaders of the Polanians, a Slavic tribe that settled in what today is Kyiv, and their name was derived from the fields, poля, that they inhabited. The location of Polanians' territory at the intersection of the important trade routes contributed to their economic and cultural development as organizers of the Kyivan Rus state. The chronicles state that they were more socioeconomically advanced than the neighboring Slavic tribes, and that, if true, marks the growth and importance of Kyiv in its beginnings. In the 9th to 10th centuries, Polanians, Polani in Ukrainian, were already known as Rus, or Ruthenia in Latin, a name that was applied to all tribes that made up the Kyivan Rus. Kyiv, however, was the capital of Polani since the 8th century. In the 5th century, Pankivska culture appears on the territory of Kyiv, which is known for its large amounts of gold and silver jewelry, used to show rank and wealth. It existed until the 8th century and simultaneously to Korchak culture, which is more northwest of it. In the 8th century, Kyiv becomes the main city in the land of Rus, a unification of the southern East Slavic tribes. And starting then, it is ruled by various people. After Kyivshche, Khoriv, and Libid, a king and a warrior leader came to power called Oleg. Very little is known about him, and his existence is only proven by chronicles, stories, and his grave in Kyiv. After Oleg came Bravlin. He ruled from about 770 to 825, and took on multiple military campaigns to the southern parts of modern-day Ukraine, including Crimea. Next were Askold and Dir, who were brothers and ruled together. However, Askold seems to have been more important. Their origin is little known, and there are many suggestions as to where they were from. One of them is that Askold and Dir were the sons of Bravlin, the previous leader. The other is that they were Varangians, or Varyagi in Ukrainian. Varangians were Viking conquerors, settlers, and traders from present-day Sweden mostly. Some suggest that Oleg and Bravlin were Varangian too, since their names were not Slavic. It is assumed, however, that in the primary chronicle of Rus, the word Varangians is not used only for Scandinavian peoples, but also for Germanic tribes. In addition, in the ethnogeographical introduction of the chronicle, Nestor never once uses specific Scandinavian anthonyms. And although later the Ruthenian kings and queens that are followed immediately after Askold and Dir may have Scandinavian names, this does not mean that they were Scandinavian by origin. The chronicler too no longer calls them Varangians, but Rus, or Ruthenian monarchs. There is more information known about Askold and Dir than the previous rulers of Kyiv, however. One of their most famous feats was the military campaign against the capital of Byzantium, which is Constantinople, in the year 860. Greek chroniclers describe this attack in detail, and our chronicler Nestor attached so much importance to the campaign that he decided to begin a systematic presentation of Ukraine's history from it. In the year 860, the land of Rus began to be called so. Kyiv had many military men under its control and felt so powerful that it could not only guarantee the independence of Ruthenian land, but also challenge powerful neighbors. The reason for the attack, however, was not that. The immediate reason for the campaign was the beating of Ruthenian merchants in Constantinople. Diplomatic relations between the two countries could also cause some tension. Emperor Theophilus died in 842, and it is likely that his son Michael III was in no hurry to confirm the ancient treaty of peace and love, which basically meant guaranteeing each other safety. This could also push Askold and Dir to go on a campaign to the city to demonstrate their power to Byzantium. The time of the attack was picked extremely well. Back in the spring, almost the entire Byzantine army of 40,000 was concentrated on the eastern borders, and the fleet was sent to the island of Crete to fight against pirates who bothered merchant ships. Only a relatively small garrison remained in Constantinople. Patriarch Photius, who becomes important later on the day of the attack said, quote, "What kind of blow and whose wrath has fallen upon us so powerfully? Where did this northern and terrible thunderstorm come from?" End of quote. Yet the number of soldiers that have come with Askold and Dir was not large by any account. Most sources give the number of 200 boats, only the Venetian deacon John 360. A boat can take 40 to 50 people, therefore the Ruthenian army consisted of 8 to 10,000 soldiers, at most 15 to 18,000, and with such a force it was impossible to capture the powerful fortifications of the Byzantine capital. Askold and Dir then counted on taking the Byzantines by surprise. Askold took Constantinople in a tight siege. Panic began in the city and then famine. In the meantime, the Ruthenians found a way to overcome impregnable walls, and they began to build an earthen rampart, intending, when it reached the level of the walls, to break into the city. Askoldendir demanded the restoration of the Treaty of Peace and Love, as well as compensation for the murder of the Ruthenian merchants, and as usual, a significant sum of money, which was called the exchange of gifts. They also thought a personal meeting with the Byzantine king. The ending of the siege has different interpretations. One record says that when the negotiations came to a halt, Patriarch Photius suddenly undertook to save the city. On the 8th day of the siege, the Patriarch left the temple and turned to the city gates praying. Taking up the solemn chant, the crowd followed him. The gates were opened and a huge procession began. Crosses, icons, banners with images of saints were carried raised high. This was meant to have stunned the Ruthenians, which were at the time pagan. At this moment, the rampart, which was built almost level with the powerful walls, suddenly began to crumble. At the hands of God, of course. The pagans then suddenly rushed to their ships in a hurry and began to sail away, as the story goes. It is doubtful that Askoldendir lifted the siege because of the procession. Perhaps they actually received news of the Byzantine army approaching, or by that time had managed to get a ransom. As Photius points out in one of his speeches, it was hardly worth thinking anything more. In addition, Constantinople had the fame of an impregnable city. It is more likely that the Byzantines destroyed the supports in the trench and the rampart collapsed, rather than it being anything else. The campaign, however, was seen as a success, and it is seen so now as well. It brought Rus, Ruthenians, and Kyiv international recognition. Even Patriarch Photius said, quote, "The people, unknown until now, have gained great fame since the time of the campaign against us." End of quote. Askoldendir did not, however, rule for long after that, and according to the primary chronicle, in 882, they were tricked by a man dressed as a merchant and murdered in Kyiv. This man was the future Oleg the Wise, and the person that began the Rurik dynasty in Kyiv. With the founding of Kyivan Rus in the second half of the 9th century, Kyiv, with its long history lasting tens of thousands of years, became its capital.
Де лежать барви, барвінкові, то не папороть цвіте, то не папороть цвіте, матінка і вінок кладе білими рученьками, дрібними слізоньками, дрібними слізоньками.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and this was What We Need to Know About Ukraine this week.